There is a site in Jerusalem that sits at the center of three of the world's major religions, and the archaeological findings from beneath it are some of the most politically sensitive, least publicly discussed, and strangest pieces of scientific information in the modern world. The Temple Mount in Jerusalem is the holiest site in Judaism, the third holiest site in Islam, and a significant sacred location in Christianity. And since the 1990s, excavations on and around it have produced findings that researchers have been unusually reluctant to publish, discuss, or explain in any transparent public forum. This is not a conspiracy story. The constraints are documented, the politics are real, and the science that does exist is genuinely significant. What makes it strange is the gap between what has clearly been found and what has been formally published. A gap that exists not because the findings are being hidden in a dramatic sense, but because the intersection of religious authority, geopolitical negotiation, and academic career incentives has created one of the most unusual information environments in the history of modern archaeology. In this video, we are going through exactly what the verified findings are, what the Bulldozer Event of 1999 destroyed, what the rescue project has recovered since then, and why the specific detail about one clay seal in particular is the most striking single piece of evidence to come out of this entire decades-long process. To understand the situation, you first need to understand who controls access to the site and why that matters so profoundly for science. The Temple Mount platform itself is administered by the Islamic Waqf, a religious trust that has controlled the site under an agreement that has been in place since the aftermath of the 1967 Six-Day War. Under the status quo arrangement reached after that war, the Waqf controls day-to-day access to the platform, and conventional archaeological excavation on the platform's surface is effectively forbidden under the political agreement that governs the site. Israeli archaeological authorities have jurisdiction over any ground-disturbing work in the surrounding area, but the platform itself, the actual surface and substrate of the mount, is controlled by the Waqf, and the scientific community has essentially no independent access to it. The result is that virtually all archaeological data recovered from the Temple Mount itself has come through rescue operations at adjacent sites, through work in the surrounding valley, or through one catastrophic event in 1999 that changed everything in the worst possible way. In late 1999, the Waqf undertook a construction project in the southeastern corner of the platform to open an entrance to the Marwani Prayer Hall, an emergency repair project, in their characterization, or a covert large-scale excavation, in the characterization of Israeli and international archaeologists who observed what happened, using mechanical bulldozers, in direct violation of every standard applicable to archaeological sites anywhere in the region. The Waqf removed approximately 400 truckloads of soil from the substructure of the platform. That is roughly 9,000 tons of fill, stripped from one of the most archaeologically significant substrates on the planet, without any excavation record, without any stratigraphic documentation, without any sieving or sampling, and without any scientific oversight of any kind. The material was dumped primarily in the adjacent Kidron Valley. An official government commission subsequently concluded that cultural and religious heritage had been damaged. The Waqf denied any intentional destruction. The scientific loss was, by any objective measure, catastrophic, because what was in that fill represented potentially thousands of years of continuous occupation at one of the most historically contested locations in the ancient world. In 2004, a rescue archaeology project was established specifically to address what had been lost, the Temple Mount Sifting Project, founded under the direction of archaeologist Gabriel Barkay of Bar-Ilan University, with operational leadership from Zakai D. Vera. The premise of the project is exactly what it sounds like. Take the 9,000 tons of dumped fill, bring it to a controlled sifting site, and pass it bucket by bucket through fine mesh sieves to recover whatever fragments and artifacts can still be physically retrieved from material that has no stratigraphic context whatsoever. The scale of this project is unique in the history of rescue archaeology. By multiple published estimates, the Sifting project has recovered well in excess of 500,000 fragments and artifacts from the dumped material, and work continues on a multi-year basis. What has actually come out of the sifting is significant, and in some cases extraordinary. The project has recovered First Temple period bone fragments, pottery sherds, and ivory fragments consistent with the 8th to 7th century BCE. And when this was reported in 2016 by a team including Barkay and Yuval Baruch of the domestic archaeological authorities, it was described as the first artifacts of that specific period ever recovered from the Temple Mount in modern scientific work. Think about what that means for a moment. Before 2016, no First Temple period material had been scientifically recovered from the mount itself, despite it being the location that ancient texts identify as the site of the First Temple. And the reason was not that the material did not exist, but that access had never been available for conventional excavation. The Sifting project has also recovered late Bronze Age and Iron Age Roman II pottery, stone vessel fragments, Byzantine Mosaic tesserae, late Roman and early Islamic coins, and arrowheads consistent with the Assyrian, Babylonian, and Roman military occupations that all passed across the platform at various points in antiquity. But the single most striking piece of evidence recovered from the entire project is a clay ceiling, called a bulla, reported in 2025. A bulla is a small lump of clay that was pressed over a rolled document or container to seal it, bearing the impression of the owner's personal seal. Functionally, the ancient equivalent of a signature or an official stamp. The bulla recovered from the Temple Mount sifting material reads, in its inscription, "Belonging to Nathan-Melech, servant of the king." Nathan-Melech is an extremely rare personal name in the ancient Hebrew world, rare enough that it appears only once in the entire Hebrew Bible, in the second book of Kings, chapter 23, verse 11, in the specific context of the religious reforms of King Josiah in the late 7th century BCE. The bulla is dated on material and paleographic ground to between roughly 1000 and 586 BCE, a date range that overlaps precisely with the period in which Nathan-Melech appears in the biblical text, a personal seal belonging to an individual with an extremely rare name, matching the exact title used in the biblical text, dated to the correct century, recovered from material excavated from the site where the events described in that text are said to have taken place. That is not proof of the biblical account in any theological sense. Archaeology cannot confirm or deny religious claims, but it is a direct, physical, material connection between the ancient text and the physical substrate of the site, of a specificity that no one seriously expected to find. Now here is the part that raises the questions this video is actually about. For a project that has recovered this much material of this level of significance from one of the most historically important locations in the world, the pace of peer-reviewed academic publication has been strikingly slow. The Nathan-Melech bulla was reported in the Israeli press in 2025. But movement from initial find to full peer-reviewed journal publication at this site routinely takes years longer than comparable finds at any other location in the region. The First Temple period material reported in 2016 has moved slowly through the formal publication pipeline relative to the speed at which comparable finds are published from other major sites. 3 categories of constraint explain this, and none of them individually is shocking, but together they create the unusual situation this video is describing. The first is access and process. The Waqf-controlled platform cannot be entered by Israeli archaeologists without negotiated permission, and any rescue excavation in the surrounding area is subject to domestic planning regulations that impose process constraints on the timing and public communication of findings. The second is political sensitivity. Any finding that touches the First Temple period, and especially anything that helps bound the physical location of any ancient temple structure, has geopolitical implications that extend well beyond the academic world, into ongoing negotiations about sovereignty, religious authority, and the legal status of the site itself. There is genuine institutional reason to manage carefully how any such finding is communicated, not as suppression in a conspiratorial sense, but as political caution that has real consequences for what gets published, when, and in what form. The third is academic incentive structure. Career incentives in archaeology push toward fewer, larger, more selective publications rather than faster, more fragmented ones. Meaning, the normal academic pipeline slows things further even without any political pressure. The result is a situation that has no real equivalent at any other comparable archaeological site in the world. A rescue project of extraordinary scale producing findings of extraordinary significance, at a location of extraordinary historical importance, where the gap between what has been physically recovered and what has been formally published is wider and more persistent than anything the discipline would normally tolerate. What has been permanently lost is also worth stating clearly. Because the 1999 bulldozer operation stripped 9,000 tons of stratified fill without any excavation record, the possibility of ever reconstructing the stratigraphic sequence of the Temple Mount platform, the layer-by-layer record of what was built, destroyed, rebuilt, and occupied across 3,000 years of continuous use, is essentially zero. The Sifting project is heroic in its effort and genuinely significant in its results, but it is fundamentally salvage archaeology, not conventional excavation. The standard scientific practice of excavating downward through carefully documented layers, recovering the physical sequence of history as it actually accumulated, is no longer available here. Not because of politics, but because the physical record was destroyed with mechanical equipment in 1999 and cannot be reconstructed from what remains. The science exists. The constraints are real. The findings are significant. The publication record is thinner than it should be by any objective standard. And the reasons for that gap are political, institutional, and structural rather than conspiratorial. That combination, real findings, real constraints, thin publication, and one of the most historically significant locations on the planet, is what makes this one of the strangest information environments in the history of modern archaeological science. If this made you want to understand more about where archaeology and contested history collide, there is another video that examines a different set of ancient claims that critics dismissed for 2 centuries, until physical evidence started coming out of the ground and changing what the experts thought they knew.